Don, thank you so much for sparing time.
My pleasure, Alan.
You went in 1962 to Irian Jaya to live among the Sawi people. You, your wife, and your 7-month-old
baby son, Stephen.
Yes. That's quite a commitment.
It was indeed. It was like God was whispering to me saying, I want you to go there. They're the people I've prepared for you to bear witness among. I know they're cannibals. I know they're headhunters. Don't worry about that. I've taken care of everything. So we went there. I went in among them, and it turned out for a couple of years they'd begun to hear, in their extreme isolation, scattered reports about tall, pale, sickly-looking beings called Tuans. That means European types, because they're all black-skinned. They're like the separated cousins of the sub-Saharan black race. And all the reports about Tuans were so glowing, positive. Wherever Tuans go, they're being obat, medicine, garam, salt, steel tools, nylon fish line, fish hooks, razor blades. From their point of view, this was all amazing technology. So they were saying, we think we'd like to welcome a Tuan. And asking other tribes, are there any spare Tuans around? Only to have the other tribes say nastily, a Tuan live among you. Who do you think you are? You Sawi, you're the worst of all the tribes. Don't get your hopes up. You'll never be favored by one of these rare, amazing beings. So the Sawi were saying wistfully, perhaps they're right, perhaps we'll never be favored, but they also said, just in case, someday, somewhere, there's a Tuan who finds out that we live here. If he decides he wants to come and live among us and does not allow the anti-Sawi propaganda of our enemies to turn him away from us, we find out that Tuan has chosen us. We will let him know in no uncertain terms we choose him. He'll be our Tuan, we'll be his tribe. Well, Alan, I'm a Tuan. My wife, Carol, a Nyonya, a female Tuan. We even had a little baby Tuan, little Stephen. When I went in among them to test their attitudes, leaving Carol and Stephen in a safe place, they found out I was one of these rare beings they'd been hearing about. I used sign language indicating I wanted their help to build a house. They got the message. They began shouting for joy. And they worked like bees in the hive, helping me build a little 7-meter by 7-meter thatch roofed house. And when it was finished, I said, still using sign language, I'm going now to fetch my wife and son. I'll return with them in 3 days' time to reside among you in this little house you've so kindly helped me build. We came back 3 days later. 400 of them were massed on the riverbank, waiting to see if I would keep my promise and return with my family. We got closer and saw all the men had war paint on. They were holding weapons. Was this a welcoming party or something else? Were we being invited to dinner or
As dinner?
to be dinner? Too late to think of retreating. We went up onto the shore in the midst of that armed host. They closed in all around us so tightly we could hardly move. Their eyes were gleaming with excitement, but they were apparently waiting for a signal. And sure enough, someone shouted a signal, Asa! And at that, they began shouting for joy, pounding on their drums, and danced around us, escorting us away from the river up to the front steps of the little thatch box. Took us several minutes to get there. Then they grew quiet, motioning to us to climb the steps because it was built up above the ground because of monsoon flooding. We went inside. When I closed the door behind us, they began pounding on their drums again, danced around us all night. All the next day, all the second night, all the second day, even all the third night. We were welcomed royally. They carried the weapons and wore the war paint in much the same way that a military honor guard in our culture wears military uniforms and holds bayonets, welcoming a special guest.
Because the funny thing about their culture is that it's completely unlike ours.
Yes, that's true.
It's a culture of treachery in that the heroes of their stories are the guys who do the bad things.
When I learned the language well enough to tell them about Judas betraying Jesus with a kiss of all things, that tickled them. They began acclaiming Judas as a special kind of Tare Duan, a master of treachery. They said, tell us more about Judas. He's our kind of guy. He's the sort of man any one of us would be proud to promise a daughter to in marriage. Believe me, that was not the response I was expecting. I sat among them praying, help, Lord, help, I need a gift of wisdom. These people honor treachery as a virtue. They think Judas as the hero, Jesus as the dupe to be laughed at. And warfare broke out to make things darker at that moment. 2 of 3 villages that we welcomed because they wanted to come out of the deep jungle, live in the open by the river, in proximity to the Tuan and the Nyonya. It was great to have that many people living close. We thought we'd have one village, but 3 came. And 2 of them were not able to restrain their memories of previous violence. And they were fighting each other right around our home. And then when I learned about their idealization of treachery, their honoring of masters of treachery as heroes, I thought, I think God has placed us in the midst of a culture that is devoid of any mechanism for making peace. I was wrong. It was possible in a context of idealized treachery only if a father in one of 2 warring villages was willing to establish a basis for mutual trust by making a sacrifice so great that everyone in both villages would know he had to take one of his own children, give his child away as a peace child, to be raised by a family in the enemy village. And if that child remained alive in the other village, the peace was secure. No one would be so evil as to invalidate a sacrifice as great as that by renewing hostility after.